With the WINN FM News, I am Kevin Brown.
And I am Yulana Weeks.
Our top stories.
Roger Williams ranks second in World Bank's essay competition on poverty. Discusses perspective at webinar.
St. Kitts and Nevis's Ambassador Williams inspires young leaders at the United Nations. Trump tariffs trigger Caribbean concerns over economic impact. Dragon gas deal dead. Cocoina Manakin also shelved as U.S. revokes Venezuela gas exploration licenses. Jamaican health officials raise alarm over container chicken. Internationally, Trump tariffs. U.S. President raises taxes on China to 125%. Now, the details.
Poverty, unemployment, and underemployment are pressing challenges in the Caribbean, affecting economic mobility, stability, and opportunities for young people. Although the region has made strides over the years, fragile economic growth and low-quality jobs are holding millions back, according to the World Bank. Study shows a high youth unemployment rate. In 2023, the youth unemployment rate in the Caribbean was at 24%, while 1 in 4 people still lived below the poverty line in Latin America and the Caribbean. To shed light on the matter, the World Bank hosted a webinar on April 8, 2025, dubbed Job Poverty in the Caribbean, Youth Perspective. On the panel was Nivision Youth Roger Williams. One of the questions on the table was, what do you think is the biggest barrier young people face in finding decent jobs today? Williams pointed to a lack of opportunities.
I think a grand overarching answer to this question would just be the simple phrase, lack of opportunities. And I could break down lack of opportunities into lack of decent skilled job opportunities that provide a perfect match for the skills that young people possess or can possess in a fair system. And this, of course, cements the need for economic diversification. I think it was Clemente who mentioned in his presentation that many countries in the Caribbean are so dependent on tourism and the financial services sector that jobs are sort of limited to those areas. I could use the example of St. Kitts and Nevis. So I also think that there's a lack of tertiary education opportunities that are made available to youth. Of course, you do have the exceptions of Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago, where tertiary education is heavily subsidized. But in other countries where this is not the case, tertiary education is seen almost as a privilege. And not a right. And this is in fact troubling.
Preceding the webinar, the World Bank invited university-level students aged 18 to 29 to participate in a Caribbean regional opinion essay competition on poverty. Roger Williams was identified as the second-place winner as his views, aspirations, and solutions on the topic captured the attention of the judges. Williams focused on St. Kitts and Nevis in his opinion piece, sharing that there is a jobs and skills shortage issue. He noted that an over-reliance on tourism, financial services, and the CBI has contributed to jobs and skill shortages in the Federation, which further contributes to job poverty. That is, despite being employed, people do not earn enough to lift themselves out of poverty. The first place winner of the World Bank's essay competition, Jamaica's Abigail Morgan, would travel to Washington, D.C. for the World Bank's Youth Summit May 19 to 20, 2025, whilst the second placer, Roger Williams, and third placer, David Salmon from Jamaica, will have exclusive sit-downs with World Bank's Caribbean leadership to discuss their ideas and insights. Williams, passionate about sustainable economic growth and development in the Caribbean, is hopeful that in the face of global challenges, leaders would talk less and act more.
On Friday, April 4th, 2025, Her Excellency Dr. Mutris Williams, Permanent Representative of St. Kitts and Nevis to the United Nations, addressed young leaders from around the world at the Future We Want Global Initiative for Young Leaders Conference. The conference in New York from April 3rd to 6th, 2025, centered on empowering youth to reinforce multilateralism, engaging youth leaders in building a world of peace. Dr. Williams began her address by acknowledging the ambitious nature of the conference's theme.
Empowering youth to reinforce multilateralism. I consider this a tall order.
Addressing the audience, which included dignitaries and organizers, she expressed her honor in sharing her insight with the young leaders, confident that,
by your very presence here today, we'll all go on to do remarkable things in this world.
Drawing on her experience as a former educator, Ambassador Williams emphasized the importance of imparting knowledge to the youth, hoping to
stimulate some critical thinking, inspire positive action, not just today, but throughout your lives and career.
She highlighted the unique position of St. Kitts and Nevis.
The smallest in our part of the world, because although we are small by nature, at the United Nations, our voice and vote are just as powerful as the other member states.
Acknowledging the common perception of young people as being
small or not adult enough to be part of decision-making processes, or incapable of making a significant difference related to key issues in the global community. However, I wish to issue a reminder to you today that young people add great value. Youth perspectives are fundamentally important, and that the world needs youth voices now more than ever. As outlined in the historic Pact of the Future, which was adopted by the United Nations on September 22nd, 2024, young people are critical agents of positive change.
Ambassador Williams emphasized the need for youth engagement in addressing global challenges.
Therefore, as world leaders continue to navigate how best to address the ever-increasing multidimensional global challenges, we need your committed, dedicated, and brilliant advocacy and action to ensure the importance of multilateralism in resolving the plethora of issues facing this world today.
Furthermore, with the 2030 deadline approaching, she urged the young leaders to champion the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs.
Additionally, as we near the year 2030, we need your ingenuity and action to champion the full, effective, and accelerated implementation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are primarily focused on creating peace and prosperity for all people and for our planet.
Referencing United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres' 2025 statement, Dr. Williams highlighted that
5 years to 2030, less than 1/5 of the targets are on course. I reiterate, the Secretary General said, 5 years to 2030, less than 1/5 of the targets are on course. I therefore challenge each one of you to select at least one sustainable development goal and to become an ambassador for that SDG. I encourage you to boldly and vigorously advocate for the attainment of that specific SDG, using every creative means at your disposal.
The ambassador also encouraged the young leaders to harness the power of technology and social media, stating,
"Technology provides unprecedented opportunities, and young people like yourselves have continued to demonstrate the immense power and impact of social media. I therefore admonish you to leverage the use of technology and social media responsibly, of course, to promote, support, and inspire positive and progressive outcomes that can benefit the wider society."
Dr. Williams challenged the traditional notion of youth as solely,
"In my view, youth are at the intersection of the present and the future. Your concerns, your ideas, and feedback are necessary to shape public policies."
Highlighting the importance of youth involvement in policymaking, Dr. Williams stressed the need for them to
seriously take a keen interest in what is happening in your societies, countries, region, and the world today, so that you have a better appreciation and understanding of how best to support the enhancement and continued implementation of these policies.
She cited St. Kitts and Nevis' Ministry of Youth as demonstrating the government's commitment to youth development and engagement. She further emphasized that the conference's theme,
"The future we want." I believe it is really a call to action for you to grasp the vision of the future that you want and to start making deliberate strides towards that future.
Ambassador Williams promoted the many opportunities for youth engagement at the United Nations, including the
newly established and operational UN Youth Office and other annual events targeting youth. I encourage you to seek out these opportunities, disseminate them widely, and get involved in some way. I have witnessed firsthand the brilliant work being done by young people across the globe, passionately advocating for issues such as climate mitigation and adaptation, quality education, the preservation of peace and justice, environmental protection, as well as the eradication of poverty. And I wholeheartedly applaud all of their brave and human efforts.
In closing, Ambassador Williams reiterated the world's anticipation of the transformative impacts to come from the innovative young leaders in attendance.
As I conclude, I wish to reiterate that the world is waiting to benefit from your innovative and visionary ideas and transformative initiatives. Therefore, follow your passions and pursue them relentlessly.
The Future We Want MUN launched the 5th conference in New York from April 3rd to 6th, 2025. In an epochal moment when stronger states are tempted to act unilaterally, the organization's actions are focused on building a more consensus-oriented attitude in the youth and reminding them that states and people have both a self-interest and a common interest in making the United Nations more effective. U.S. President Donald Trump's latest wave of tariffs has come into force, with imports from China facing a staggering 104% rate amidst escalating tensions between the world's two largest economies. These tariffs, ranging from 11% to 104%, now impact imports from approximately 60 U.S. trade partners whom President Trump has labeled worst offenders due to perceived unfair trade practices. The move signifies a dramatic escalation in the global trade landscape, prompting widespread apprehension about potential economic repercussions. The Caribbean region finds itself caught in the crosshairs of these new trade policies. What most Caribbean nations face, a baseline tariff of 10%, oil-producing Guyana is reportedly hit with a higher 38% tariff. A particularly concerning aspect for the Caribbean is the proposed fee on Chinese-made or Chinese-flagged vessels visiting U.S. ports. This fee, potentially reaching $1.5 million, could significantly inflate the cost of doing business in the Caribbean, given the region's heavy reliance on cargo ships for importing goods. Before the tariffs took effect, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva stated on April 3, 2025, expressing concern about the potential global impact, quote, "We are still assessing the macroeconomic implications of the announced tariff measures, but they clearly represent a significant risk to the global outlook at a time of sluggish growth." Georgieva emphasized the need for international cooperation, stating, quote, "It is important to avoid steps that could further harm the world economy. We appeal to the United States and its trading partners to work constructively to resolve trade tensions and reduce uncertainty." End quote. The IMF plans to share its assessment in the upcoming World Economic Outlook during the IMF World Bank spring meetings. In response to the unfolding situation, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis has called for a multi-pronged approach involving advocacy, education, food sustainability, and a shift in purchasing habits. Recognizing the widespread impact of the tariffs, the Prime Minister emphasized the importance of presenting a strong evidence-based case for the Caribbean.
There's hardly any country in the world that can escape. Not even the large economies can really escape. Not China, not Canada, not Mexico. So our argument with the US is that we want to carve out, because with us, you have a significant surplus of $54 billion.
Highlighting the trade imbalance between the US and the Caribbean, the Prime Minister asserted,
"So if the argument is these countries have surpluses with us and it's unfair to us, fair enough, what about the countries like us that have deficits with you?" And so we are going to see what that would be. I think that question was received, and I think when the Secretary of State was in the Caribbean, he said he will take that back to Washington. And so we are waiting what the response would be.
The Prime Minister also stressed the need for public awareness and understanding.
All people need to know This is not government dependent, as some people want to make it out to be. This is beyond government. So our people need to come together and understand this. This would affect prices of certain things, or has the potential to affect prices of certain things, certain goods, certain services.
The Prime Minister acknowledged the potential need for adjustments in consumer behavior, stating,
"We might be called upon to change what we consume, what type of services we access. We might be called upon to do that based on the cost. Because let's say you're accustomed to one particular type of rice, but that rice is coming from a country that there's a tariff. But you can get the rice, let's say, from South America, Guyana, northern Brazil, that is much cheaper. Then we might just have to say, look, we might have to eat a different type of rice. It is a reality."
In a move toward greater self-sufficiency, Prime Minister Drew announced plans to boost local food production.
That is why now we are going to now start to, as I said, farm 100 acres immediately. And before the year done, we want to have about 300 acres under production of food for our people.
CARICOM Chair and Prime Minister of Barbados Mia Mottley echoed concerns about the potential economic fallout, emphasizing the Caribbean's reliance on imports.
Our Caribbean economies are largely reliant on imports. Just go to the supermarket or visit the mall or the hardware shop or the electronics store, and you will see that most of the things there are not produced in this region. Many of those commodities are either purchased directly from the United States of America or pass through the United States of America on their way to the Caribbean region.
She attributed this dependence to a legacy of our colonial dependence, but also acknowledged efforts to diversify the economies of the Caribbean region. Motley warned of the potential impacts on consumers.
This trade war and the possibility of a $1 million to $1.5 million US levy on all Chinese-made ships entering US harbors will mean higher prices for all of us at the corner shop, higher prices at the supermarket, higher prices at the electronics store, higher prices for us at the shop, higher prices for us at the restaurant, higher prices for us at the car dealership and beyond.
She stressed that these issues are not distant problems, noting,
"But the reality, my friends, is that if you buy food, if you buy electronics, if you buy clothes, it will impact you."
Motley outlined a strategy for the region, calling for re-engagement with the United States, regional unity, investment in local agriculture and manufacturing, and strengthened ties with other nations.
We must not rely solely on one or two markets. We need to be able to sell our Caribbean goods to a wider, more stable global market.
Appealing directly to President Trump, Mia Mottley emphasized the Caribbean's friendship with the United States, urging him to
consider your decades-long friendship between your country and ours, and look to the Caribbean, recognizing that the family ties, yes, are strong. Let us talk, I hope, and let us work together to keep prices down for all of our people.
U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer recently shared that nearly 50 countries have approached him to discuss the tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump during a Senate Finance Committee meeting on April 8, 2025. In regional news, Dragon gas deal dead. Cocoina Manakin also shelved as U.S. revokes Venezuela gas exploration licenses, CNC3 reports.
It's a blow to this country's progress on major cross-border natural gas deals with Venezuela.
We have now been informed that our license from OFAC, which is dated the 18th of December 2023, has been revoked by OFAC. And that license is now revoked by OFAC, as well as our Coquina Mannequin license.
Prime Minister Stuart Young blamed this setback on shifts in the geopolitical landscape at the hands of U.S. President Donald Trump. The OFAC license, which was granted in 2023, allowed Trinidad and Tobago to legally engage financially with Venezuela, despite U.S. sanctions, enabling for joint development in fields such as the Dragon gas field. With the country's economic hopes hinging on the success of the energy deal, Prime Minister Young assured efforts will continue to engage with U.S. authorities over the move.
There's a wind-down period that we have immediately done what is responsible, and I have requested the necessary telephone calls and conversations with the decision makers in Washington. I have every expectation that I will get that opportunity. I'm engaged with our lawyers in Washington. I expect that we will, in the interim, be utilizing the legal process to make our case as to why our license should not be revoked.
Young maintained confidence in the previous assurances from U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio that the U.S. had no intention to harm Trinidad and Tobago, but it now opens the door for negotiations. He, however, would not say what the U.S. could want or what TNT would be willing to give. The PNM party has promised to steer the country out of financial strain, with the opposition constantly questioning how. This latest development forces the government to figure out its next steps again.
Every time there has been some adversity presented, founders Kijan put it a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. I'll now put in place plan E, plan F. And we're also going to be talking about the diversification plans we have. But don't give up. Don't give up hope.
The Prime Minister also revealed that he had not spoken to his Venezuelan counterparts, but now he will turn his attention to discussing the development with them, BP and Shell. Jesse Ramdale, CNC3 News.
Jamaican health officials raise alarm over container chicken. Television Jamaica has that story.
A public health warning following a container filled with chicken that drifted along Jamaica's coastline.
It was emptied by dozens of residents who rushed to claim the meat, but health officials are raising serious concerns, warning that the chicken may be contaminated and unfit for consumption.
Romardo Lyons reports.
Over the weekend, concern was high over potentially contaminated chicken being consumed in St. Catherine. The concern now, has any of the chicken escaped the confines of St. Catherine and distributed across other parishes? Health officials argue that people are winging it, not thinking about the potential dangers. Now a stern warning from public health specialist Professor Peter Figueroa.
It is best to avoid either eating, whether they cook it or not, or selling or distributing any kind of food that has washed up on our shore.
He says it's a tender situation, but the circumstances around it demand caution.
If it is frozen chicken and it was in a container at sea, it is most likely that it has thawed out and has not been kept under the normal storage conditions because the container fell off the ship and is in the sea and then washes up.
This woman on social media says the chicken she got was still frozen. But Professor Figueroa says even if it appears to be fresh,
even if it is not smelling, it is better, it is safer not to cook it, not to distribute it, and not to eat it. Because there is a risk in a situation like this that people could get food poisoning.
This container washed ashore along the Helsha coastline in St. Catherine on April 3, loaded with chicken. It was emptied.
Chicken bug this, you would say, slaughtered according to Islamic rites. What that mean, dog? What that mean? The chicken is blessed! The chicken is blessed!
This video shows scores of people along the shoreline leaving with multiple packs of chicken. But after concerns were raised,
good to be true. Alright, there you go.
Another public health specialist, Dr. Orville Nemhard, says the concern over the chicken is out of caution because of what isn't known.
The issue really is the unknown. I mean, we import meats. So if it is that they are transported and kept at the appropriate temperatures throughout whatever time of transportation, then that's fine. The issue is that those questions can't be answered for this particular set of items. And we know once it is that the cold chain is broken in that regard, then the potential for infections or the spread of infections through contaminated meat is high.
Also over the weekend, both the Ministry of Agriculture and the opposition urged the public against consuming, selling, or distributing the chicken. The ministry said the chicken, labeled under the Brazilian brand Perdix, was not intended for the Jamaican market. The ministry says it confirmed that the container fell from a vessel while in transit to the Cayman Islands. Romardo Lyons, TVJ News.
We now bring you these international reports.
The U.S. President Donald Trump announces he's raising tariffs on Chinese goods to 125% with immediate effect. Trump says it's based on Beijing's lack of respect to the world's markets, adding its trade practices are not sustainable. While singling out Beijing for punishment, Trump also authorized a 90-day pause on so-called reciprocal tariffs, lowering them to a universal 10% baseline. The White House says this is to allow negotiations with countries willing to make a deal.
Because of the large number of inbounds, we've had more than 75 countries contact us, and I imagine after today there will be more. So it is just a processing problem. Each one of these solutions is going to be bespoke. It is going to take some time, and President Trump wants to be personally involved. So that's why we're getting the 90-day pause.
Mike Hanna joining us from outside the White House. First on China. So we've seen these reciprocal tit-for-tat tariffs between China and the U.S. and now this announcement, 125%.
Indeed, yes. And interesting that in the announcement of the 125% increase on China comes the shock news that the reciprocal tariffs against every other country are going to be dropped, that only that 10% baseline tariff, as it was described, is kept in place. So in keeping both of these issues in the same social media statement, President Trump attempting, it would appear, to split the world between two things, China and us. Making the point, it would appear, that the U.S. is negotiating with more than 70 countries, whereas China is now cast on the outside because it retaliated against the United States. Now the U.S. is portraying all of this as a very cunning strategy. We heard from the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, recently, who was saying that President Trump goaded China. The Secretary of Treasury implying that what happened is that President Trump set a trap for China, and when it responded with increasing its tariffs, then he basically split the global international community into us and them. Scott Bessent saying as well, driving this point home, that in the initial reciprocal tariffs that President Trump inflicted on a number of countries around the world, this was what the Treasury Secretary says was a ceiling. Going back to the baseline 10% is, he says, a flaw. So he's attempting to portray all of this as a strategy to get all the countries into individual negotiations or bespoke negotiations, as he put it, in which President Trump will individually involve himself in each individual negotiation with each country. So this is a marathon attempt to do in 90 days. Some critics, so, contend that this is President Trump backing down. And in this way, he is able to do it, allow to relieve the markets which had been plunging and which are now responding strongly to the lifting of the reciprocal tariffs against the bulk of the world's countries. So that is where we are now, a very whiplash day on the stock markets, and also indeed a whiplash day here in the White House, because all Trump's advisors had been saying all the time, this is a national emergency. There will be no negotiation. Now we are told there's not only going to be negotiation, there are going to be more than 70 separate negotiations.
Mike, what is the reaction to this announcement? Has it caught people and even some in the administration off guard?
Well, it's difficult to gauge at this early point. Certainly the markets responded immediately. As that social media message was put out, the markets basically were fighting back very, very strongly indeed. Members of his administration, well, we heard from the Treasury Secretary saying that this was the idea all along, saying that he had spoken to President Trump on Sunday and he had really grasped the full plan, as he put it, of what President Trump was doing. Others within the administration we haven't heard from, particularly from the Commerce Secretary, for example, who was one of those who had said this is an emergency, it is not a negotiation. We haven't yet heard as well from Congress, which we are going to be hearing about, no doubt, very soon. But there we've got another issue, the repetition of the fact that this is not a negotiation, it's an emergency. President Trump had to introduce these tariffs in the form of a national emergency because Congress has the right to impose taxes, including tariffs. He basically short-circuited Congress by using this emergency to introduce these tariffs. Congress is likely to be harping on about this. It has been fairly quiet about this in recent days, but what we've been hearing is groans of discontent and groans even from Republicans that the president has been usurping the fiscal duties of Congress, and this has got to be brought to an end. So by doing this now, by removing the reciprocal tariffs, President Trump may be hoping that he'll lower the temper of anger in Congress.
For now, we'll tell you about Pakistan because it's expelling thousands of Afghan nationals in the past week, according to the UN Refugee Agency. Islamabad started that new campaign of deportations after a March deadline for Afghans to leave voluntarily expired. All Afghan nationals without legal documentation to stay in Pakistan have been warned to return home or then to be expelled. Kamal Haider has more from the Turkam border crossing on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border.
We're outside the holding area where the Afghan families are turning up on the back of trucks with their entire belongings. They are processed here and then they cross the border into Afghanistan. Now, according to the details that we have, over 10,000 Afghans have already crossed the border after the deadline ran out on the 31st of March. Now, there are almost 1.5 million Afghans who will be leaving in the first phase, including the Afghan citizen card holders, as well as those residing illegally in Pakistan. But human rights organizations have criticized the move, saying that these people were not given enough time, that the return should be in a dignified manner. Pakistan, on the other hand, says that it has been host to the Afghans for over 4 decades, and it wants them to go back because Pakistan itself is suffering an economic crisis. Also, Pakistan blames these Afghan refugees for a rising crime rate in this country. However, the Afghan government has denied that. They've asked the Pakistani government to reconsider the expulsion of the Afghan citizens plan. And Pakistan, of course, on the other hand, has not given in to the demands of the Afghan government. But this, of course, will create difficulties for a great number of Afghan families. Many Afghans were born here in Pakistan, raised here. They do not know of any other country. And of course, they're leaving behind their life savings, their homes that they built with their incomes, and also contributed to the Pakistani labor force. But there are apprehensions that because of the crisis in Afghanistan, these people will not be able to settle immediately. And this, of course, could unfold into another humanitarian crisis. Kamal Haider, Al Jazeera, Torkham.
Venezuelan migrants deported by the US to a so-called mega prison in El Salvador are in legal limbo. They've not committed a crime in the country they're detained in, but are also unable to return to the US. That's according to lawyer Ingrid Escobar, who said it remains unclear in which courts their cases will be heard.
We could say that today there's an international emergency regime in El Salvador, something that can be called Guantanamo 2.0.
The US sent Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador in March, with President Donald Trump's administration saying they were members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. But lawyers and families of incarcerated migrants have said their relatives and clients are not criminals. David Morales is a top lawyer at human rights organisation Cristasal.
People were being sent to an imminent situation of human rights violations. This is something the US authorities should consider. I think the events happening in the country could be argued at federal courts in the US, arguing whether this measure allows for a challenge of decisions to deport to El Salvador.
Amnesty International said last month they received reports on the high-security prison. They indicated, quote, extreme overcrowding, lack of access to adequate medical care, and widespread ill treatment amounting to cruelty, inhuman or degrading treatment.
They are among the first deaths directly attributed to aid cuts imposed by US President Donald Trump. 8 people in South Sudan suffering from cholera who died last month on a 3-hour walk to seek medical treatment, according to Save the Children. The UK-based charity blames the deaths on Trump's cuts, which it says forced local services to close. Here's Save the Children's South Sudan country director, Christopher Niamandi.
Generally, we are receiving less and less funding from all donors, including the European donors, right? But the US funding generally was the more drastic because the implication was funding that we actually secured, where we were actually implementing and delivering services and doing work, and we had to stop on those activities.
He added that there should be, quote, global moral outrage that the decisions made by powerful people in other countries have led to child deaths in just a matter of weeks. Experts have warned the cuts, including the cancellation of more than 90% of USAID's contracts, could cost millions of lives in coming years due to malnutrition, AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria and other diseases. The US State Department said it did not have information about the reported deaths. A spokesperson said many US government programs remained active, but support for medical services had also been used to enrich the country's leaders. South Sudan's government has acknowledged a significant amount of public corruption, but denied specific accusations of graft. Save the Children supported 27 health facilities in eastern South Sudan until earlier this year. The US cuts forced 7 to shut completely and 20 to close partially, the organisation said in a statement. Over a third of South Sudan's roughly 12 million people have been displaced by either conflict or natural disaster. The United Nations says the country could also be on the brink of a new civil war after fighting broke out in February in the northeast. A cholera outbreak declared last October has caused hundreds of deaths, the World Health Organization has said.
You were listening to the WINN FM 98.9 newscast. Our top stories were:
Roger Williams ranked second in World Bank's essay competition on poverty. Discusses perspective at webinar.
St. Kitts and Nevis's Ambassador Williams inspires young leaders at the United Nations. Trump tariffs trigger Caribbean concerns over economic impact. Dragon gas deal dead. Cocoina Manakin also shelved as U.S. revokes Venezuela gas exploration licenses. Jamaican health officials raise alarm over container chicken. Internationally, Trump tariffs. U.S. President raises taxes on China to 125%. Thank you for listening.